For a long time, the big rivalry in digital audio workstations, or DAWs, has been Ableton Live versus FL Studio. It's a silly argument really, almost all DAWs are equally capable these days, but judged on available MIDI controllers, Ableton wins hands down. That's because there's never been a dedicated FL Studio MIDI controller, until now. The Novation FLkey 37 and FLkey Mini are MIDI controllers designed to make creating music easier for beginner and experienced FL Studio users alike. I'm Ian, and this is the Make Use of review of the FLkey 37, the first dedicated FL Studio MIDI controller. Now, before we even get into this review, why should you care what I think about MIDI controllers? That's a fair question. This is a tech website after all. But before I worked as a writer, I was a professional musician. I did a degree in music, I toured playing instruments and as a DJ for several years. In terms of digital music production, I've played in studios, but I've also made beats, produced and remixed albums, I've contributed to music for television and for games. I even briefly taught production classes for the Ableton Live software. Throughout this time, I've used a variety of MIDI controllers. I've even built a couple of my own custom ones. I learned to play instruments long before I got into digital music production, and so it was MIDI controllers that really bridged that gap for me. There was, on the one hand, my live out-of-the-box experience, and then on the other, there's this focused, software-driven, in-the-box production that dominates modern music now, and the MIDI controller is the go-between. Here's the real key though. Despite my experience with controllers, production, despite a formal musical education, I'm an FL Studio noob. I've used pretty much every single digital audio workstation over the years for different projects, but I haven't honestly really used FL Studio much since I made the switch from Ableton Live, and that was like 15 years ago now. So while all DAWs are just tools, FL Studio isn't the exact type of tool that I've had in my hands for years and use naturally like I do Ableton or a screwdriver, for example. So my impressions of this controller come hand in hand with the FL Studio workflow. So if you're an absolute beginner hoping to get into music production, this review might actually give you somewhat of a unique perspective on how the controller and the software interact from a learner's perspective. So before we dive in and get hands-on with the FLkey, what is a MIDI controller? If you've never come across it before, here's a very quick two-sentence primer. MIDI, or Musical Instrument Digital Interface, is a way electronic musical instruments and computers talk to each other. A MIDI controller is a piece of physical hardware with keys or buttons that sends and receives those MIDI signals. What this means is that MIDI controllers can vary wildly. There are full-size MIDI keyboards that feel like proper weighted piano keys. Some, like this, have arrays of drum pads echoing the classic MPC hardware. Others have the kind of faders you would typically find on a studio mixing desk, or knobs as well. Almost all modern MIDI controllers, although this MPD is pushing 15 years old now, combine these elements into something allowing a broad range of physical control over music creation and production. Hopefully that definition is enough. Yeah. But anyway, more recently, MIDI controllers have included features to actually control the music software that you are using. So this can really cut down on the time that you're using things like keyboards and mouse. And Ableton's own Push 2 is pretty much the pinnacle of this. That allows almost complete control of live software without having to touch the computer at all. It's a fantastic hardware controller. Now, the FLkey 37 and Mini are the first controllers designed to bring some of this software control to FL Studio. This review focuses on the FLkey 37 rather than the Mini. While the Mini is much more portable, it lacks a few of the features of the 37 key version, notably chord modes and the screen. It also only has 25 smaller keys. Having used both, however, this FLkey Mini is one of the nicest feeling portable controllers I've ever used, and it's almost $100 cheaper than the $199 FLkey 37, so it's definitely worth considering. If you'd like to know a full rundown of the differences between the 37 key version and the Mini version, along with what comes with both, you can check out the article in the description of this video. There's a full written version of this review there. The FLkey 37 blends a useful hardware setup of piano keys and drum pads and knobs, which will work to control any DAW with a MIDI mode. It takes this basis and goes beyond it with FL Studio specific modes controlling the DAW transport, that is play, stop and record, DAW options like quantize, undo and score log, and direct control of the channel rack, mixer and presets within devices. It also has an onboard scale and chord mode, which again will work with any software, providing an easy way to hit the right notes for those maybe that don't have a traditional music background, or people like me who just can't be bothered. Finally, it has the ubiquitous note repeat function, providing those crispy hi-hat rolls with a single button press. Now, this review is not about FL Studio, but it is important to acknowledge why having a dedicated FL Studio controller will be a big deal to some folks. For a long time, FL Studio wasn't just seen as a competitor to other DAWs, it was seen as the only accessible option to those on a budget. Almost all DAWs either need to be repurchased on every major update or require a subscription. Since day one, ImageLine has sold FL Studio knee Fruity Loops as a one-time purchase that's cheaper than its competitors with free updates for life. This, along with rampant piracy, has hurt ImageLine a lot over the years, and still this policy has never changed. The FLkey controllers come with a 6-month trial of the Producer Edition of FL Studio, along with a few extra effects and software instruments. The Producer Edition is very much like the standard edition of various other DAWs, except it costs just $199, and you pay that once. Free updates for life. I know we've taken quite a journey to even get to the review part of the review, but I feel like these points are all essential to understanding why the FLkey is such a great concept and a great controller, although it is not without its flaws. Anyway, before we get into that, let's do a very quick demo of what the FLkey 37 can do. So let's have a quick hands-on rundown of what this thing can do. Now, bear in mind, I do not have the time to give an exhaustive rundown of what all the hardware can do, and this is a pre-release version of the hardware too. Also, as I mentioned, I am not a genius at FL Studio. I am an absolute noob. I know Ableton Live like the back of my hand. I don't know much about FL Studio at all. But this is the example project you get when you open up FL Studio, and as you can see, the 808 that you get in a standard project is just already set up here for you. So you can pad drum if you want to, but I'm thinking techno today, so I'd like this all to be sequenced. So straight away, to get myself just going, I'm going to press Shift, I'm going to press Sequencer, and as you can see, we have a sequence now. If I press play, you will see the light moves across the sequence, and this is where the drums are going to play. So, simple 4-to-the-floor techno, let's do that, except from the fact I'm on the clap, so I need to go up to the kick channel and do that. I'd like this to be a double measure. Nice. And then hats. I think I'm just going to go for your pretty standard, that. Yep, you can't really beat that. Nice and simple. Now for the claps, I'm going to go offset claps because I like doing offset claps like that. And then for the snare, they're going to be on. Just nothing fancy. Now, already I can hear there's some volume tweaking I want to do. Later on, I'll do a lot more changing. I'll change these sounds, but just to get a rough idea of where I am, I want to tweak some volume. So I'm going to press Shift and I'm going to press Channel Volume. And I'm going to make sure that I've got all of those. On the left side, you can see those knobs highlighted. And now I can change the volumes of each one. So let's turn them all down, for example. Let's just get the snare, the kick nice and loud. And the hats. And the clap and snare can be about the same volume. But to give them a bit of variation, I'm going to also press Shift and press Channel Pan, and I'm going to put this clap to the left and the snare to the right. So if you're listening in headphones, you should notice that the snare and clap are on different sides now. So substitute these basic samples with the samples that you know and love, and you can get a basic beat going very quickly. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I haven't touched the mouse or keyboard at all since starting. However, I'm going to now because I'm opening up Flex, which is a synthesizer I vaguely remember, and I'm going to press Shift, Instrument, which should put me in instrument mode. There we go. And now I can move up and down the presets on the keyboard here. So let's find something I'm looking for. Ambiclav. I like the sound of that because I want to go, make something dub techno-y very quickly. Now I like that, but if I really wanted to go through and check things out, I know I'm going to want some kind of minor chord because dub techno. So Shift, Scale Chord, and now all of these are chords. And you can use the page left and right to go between triads. Yeah, so we're in C minor triads. The top, so top triads 7ths, or top 7ths 9ths, or top 7ths and bottom 6 9ths, but that's like some kind of minor 6 9. Anyway, I know I'm going to want 9th chords because I love them. And if I go into Shift plug-in mode for the knobs, I can start affecting these as well. So let's just wake them all up and put them all down like this. And so I like that, but we need some reverb and delay on that. And a bit of unison. A bit of phasing maybe. So I kind of like what I've got going on here. So I'm going to record it. Simple. So again, so far I touched the mouse in order to get a flex in and to record this nice little thing, but that's it so far. Now, I think I'm going to add just one more thing. So, I'm back to the flex here. Now, I know I want to do something a bit more... Well, that might be nice. I've been recording the whole time. So I quite like this sound, and I like using these chords as well. But instead, I think I want to do something a bit different. Okay, so I have this quite nice dark resonance, and I want to make a user chord. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the Shift key down and press user chord here. And now all of these pads are open for me to build my own chords with. So I'd like to make a really wide pad with lots of notes that basically make up a minor 7th chord. So I'm going to hold down this button. I'm going to press this bottom C. I know I want that. I know I want the octave, the 5th, the minor 3rd, and the 7th. And now it's just on there. So once again, I'm going to go back to the plugin thing. I know with this one, I want this to be filtered down quite a lot. And I want it to have a lot of reverb. That's all well and good, but what I'd like as well is some variations on my chord. So again, I'm staying in user chord mode. I'm gonna make another variation of the same chord, which starts on the lower E minor, goes up to C, 7th, this, and this, and now I have another chord. Now, this is all well and good, but I'd like another variation on that chord again, which is higher. So I'm going to put the keyboard up an octave, I'm going to hold that down, and I'm just basically just going to do all of those notes again. Okay, so I'm going to do some kind of recording now, maybe. Yeah. So quite quickly, with user-created chords and with a little bit of knob twiddling, I've got an extra element I'd like to add to this idea. And that's it. So this is hardly the song of the century, but it was never meant to be. This is just a little example from someone who's a bit of a Fruity Loops, FL Studio noob. And if you are an FL Studio Power user and you're triggered by how badly I use this piece of software, well, good. We all had to start somewhere. If I watched you use Ableton Live, I'd probably feel much the same way. However, I absolutely love this MIDI controller. It's so much fun to work with. By the way, if you want to use the mixer, as you can see down here, you can just change to this mixer like this, and you can affect it that way too. In fact, let's just bring out these things for now. So this thing is really quite special. I couldn't talk about it in general because this thing is under embargo, but I've asked old friends of mine who've used Fruity Loops, FL Studio since back when it was called Fruity Loops, and I've just sort of very carefully asked them, like, you know, what do you feel about MIDI controllers? And they've all said, yeah, it's pretty good. But I said, but what do you feel about MIDI controllers when it comes to things like the way Ableton is controlled with MIDI controllers and FL Studio? And pretty much everyone said the same thing, which is kind of like, well, it just doesn't exist. But it does. It exists now. It's here. This is it. And it is really, really quite fun to use. I imagine if you're someone who is way more into FL Studio than I am, that you will find this thing an absolute joy and a real help to your workflow. The general workflow of the FLkey 37 is fantastic. As you saw from that demo, it really shines at allowing musicians to get ideas down quickly when inspiration strikes. The drum pads play many roles. They're selectors between modes, they're a sequencer with visual feedback, and they're also the traditional drum and sample triggering things, amongst a few others. Now, those pads are decent quality and they are good, but this is one of my personal criticisms of the FLkey, but that criticism, I warn you, is deeply subjective. Simply, over the years, I just know I like softer, wider pads that you have to hit a bit harder to trigger max velocity. Yeah, you can change the velocity curve of most drum pads, but just these particular harder ones, this style of pad doesn't do it for me. However, I know many people who think I'm out of my mind and that a harder pad gives better overall control. Yeah, your mileage may vary. Subjectivity. The full-sized, unweighted plastic piano keys are the same that you will find on almost all cross-purpose controllers. And 37 keys is just a nice balance. It allows some chord work if you are a piano player, but it's small enough not to completely dominate your desk space. Speaking of size, the FLkey 37 is 55 by 23.5 by 5.5 centimeters, compared to the 33 by 17 by 3 centimeters of the FLkey Mini. The latter, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the best portable controllers I've ever used. It's way smaller than my laptop, but it has more input and control options than most things that I've used. I think I prefer it even over the much-loved Mini Akai range of controllers that are all the rage and have been for a long time. The control knobs on both have a very pleasing weight behind them. They're very easy to move smoothly, and they were fantastic for recording automation like filter sweeps, and they generally are good for balancing audio across the channel racks or even the main mixer, all of which you can do without touching the mouse. The control knobs are small, but they have a pleasing weight behind them. They're easy to move smoothly, and they were fantastic for recording automation like filter sweeps, but you can also use them just to generally balance audio across channel racks, as you saw, or the main mixer. You can choose between various pre-mapped modes for them, allowing for a whole bunch of control of tracks as a whole, and parameters of soft synthesizers and instruments within those racks. Again, it's the only thing that does this for FL Studio. It's quite a special feeling. Lastly, there is a custom mode, and this is the same custom mode across all Novation devices. It allows you to create unique mappings using Novation components, a visual browser and software-based tool for creating custom MIDI mappings. Put simply, there's just never been anything like this for FL Studio users. But how does the FLkey compare to other MIDI controllers? Well, it's actually quite difficult to make that comparison. There are so many options for different kinds of controllers, even at roughly this size and this budget. But oddly enough, the direct competitor to the FLkey 37 is the Novation Launchkey 37. Same company, almost the same body, and you can see the same DNA. They're almost identical. Now, even this isn't simple, because the Launchkey has none of the FL Studio functionality we've been talking about this entire review. It's aimed principally at Ableton Live, but it has some key features that work across all DAWs that are missing here. For example, one feature of the Launchkey that I absolutely love is its arpeggiator. It's on board, so works with all software and any MIDI instruments you happen to have around, but it has this wonderful pair of features called mutate and deviate, which randomizes the notes in an arpeggiation and also the pauses in an arpeggiation, which can create really beautiful variations. The Launchkey 37 and the FLkey 37 share the same chord and scale modes, same level of customization, same materials and the same build quality, even the same price, which does beg the question, where is this beautiful arpeggiator on the FLkey 37? Now, I could go on and compare yet more 37 key controllers, but it's pointless. The entire idea behind the FLkey 37 is that it works natively with FL Studio, and if that's your DAW of choice, then this controller is simply incredible. So, should you buy the FLkey controllers, the 37 and the Mini? They're both fantastic controllers for the price. Yes, there's differences even within Novation between the Launchkey and the FLkey, and that's a bit jarring. But to be honest, the general lack of love for FL Studio across the entire MIDI hardware manufacturing sphere is probably way worse. This is the first MIDI controller for FL Studio, and it's not perfect, but it has the same high build quality and intuitive user interface that Novation is known for across the board. So if you are an FL Studio user, the FLkey 37 and FLkey Mini are the best MIDI controllers available for you right now. So I hope this review was useful to you, and as I mentioned earlier in it, there is a written version of it you can find in the description, which has a few more details than the spoken version I have just given you. If you are either an FL Studio user or a Launchkey user or a MIDI controller user in general, and you have an opinion on what I have said in this video, please do let us know in the comment section below. But for now, I hope you have a great day. Take care.